Before we do that though, let's get another trivia question going. It's trivia time. Everybody get ready. You can win a point. First person, again, to tell us the correct answer, you can throw it in the chat. Might be easier to unmute and just blurt it out to this question. What is the longest river in the United States? Any guesses?
The Snake River.
The Snake River, okay, that's a guess. Mississippi, I see there. What do we have? Oh, Mississippi, we had two people guess.
Mississippi.
Couple Mississippis.
Missouri.
Missouri.
I think it's Missouri.
Yep.
It's Missouri. Who said it first though? I felt like we had two people blurted out at the same time.
I was second, so whoever was before me.
Oh, well, that's gracious of you. I think, yeah, who was it?
Was it you, Rep Fergus?
Yeah, I did mention it.
Oh, all right. Well,
Good with
you got
trivia.
it. Really good guesses, but does anybody have a guess at how long it is before I tell you? That's a tougher guess. It's at 2,565 miles. So that's pretty impressive. The longest river in the United States. And with that, thank you so much for playing trivia. We got one more trivia question coming up, so keep on it, pay attention. That'll be later in the day. And I'm going to turn things over now to Jenny to get us started.
Thanks, everyone. Well, I don't want to take up too much time. We've got Christy Cowers with us, and Christy knows everything. I feel like we're so fortunate to have her with us today. Christy is out of Colorado, Denver, as Melissa said. She also is the director of the National P3 Center, where she focuses on really integrating birth to 5 systems with K-12, and she has worked with school districts, state agencies, governor's offices, even governor's offices, all manner of early learning stakeholders. And so we're really, really fortunate to have her with us today to help us think through, as Melissa said, beyond the birth to 5 systems, how do we integrate, how do we think P3 as Christy knows. So after Christy, we'll be joined by Patrick from our education team. Patrick's going to give us some legislative trends in the last year or so around pre-K to 3rd grade legislation across the country. So Christy, please take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you. Since I work both in academia and with school districts, this is an insane time of year for all of us. So I'm imagining the same is true for all of you. So thank you for your time. Fair warning, I am about to gallop through a lot of content, but I also know as legislators, you're pretty accustomed to that. I stand in awe of how you all juggle so many topics so rapidly. So buckle up. I have about 35 slides I'm going to move through, and then I would like to leave a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. You all can see my slides, right? Not the presenter view? All right, great.
Ooh, I think we are seeing the presenter view.
You are seeing the presenter view.
Because we're seeing your first slide and the second one, the smaller version.
How about that? Better?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I am going to talk about the alignment content in sort of 3 chunks. A little bit about the research around alignment and systems work, the reality that we face in all of our states, to be frank, and then also talk a little bit about the possibilities in an effort to be optimistic about what is happening in places and probable in your own states. So let me start with research. And I want to really focus on 2 big bodies of literature. One is disparities that we see in educational trends. And the other is child development, which I know you all have spent some time already on, so I'm going to move quickly through that, but it is an important anchor for these concepts. So let's start with this notion of disparities. When we look at national education data, and these are NAEP data, these are national trends, not state specific, but we can certainly pull out your state specific trends. Which, as you all know, is the federally administered assessment that begins at 4th grade, has been administered since the early 90s, which lets us take some nice longitudinal looks at what's happening. We see trends of slight improvement these are fourth grade reading scores that I've disaggregated by race and ethnicity. But I think a more important way to be looking at data like these is to really look at the achievement gaps between subpopulations. So in 1998, there was a 32-point gap in reading between Black and white children in the United States. 20 years later, despite all of the reforms, and we could spend days talking about reforms in education, reforms in early childhood, despite all of the policy reform efforts in the last 23, 25 years, we still have about a 25-point gap based on race and ethnicity. And it's not just about race and, I should also say, the more concerning part is looking at the flatlining that has happened over the last 10 years. We did see decreasing gaps between 1998 and 2009, but in the last 10 years, that gap has stayed pretty steady. We have not done much to budge it. I should say I present in many states. There is not a single state whose data look much better than this. Many states' data looks actually worse. When we look at a different way to cut the data, which would be eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, so this is a proxy for family income, we see similar trends. 20 some years ago, there was a 31-point gap. Now we have a 28-point gap. So slight narrowing, but personally, this hardly feels something worth celebrating. So we clearly have some inequities and disproportionalities in who is succeeding and who is not in our systems. One of the other things we know from research, though, is that these achievement gaps, which we start measuring in fourth grade on NAEP and in third grade in state assessment systems, research tells us that these gaps in ability or achievement appear as early as 9 months of age. It's hard to talk about achievement gaps with babies, but when we're talking about skills and abilities, and then compare those by mother's income, or mother's education, family income, race, ethnicity, we do see gaps between those subpopulations this early. These may be repeat slides. I don't know what your full curriculum has included. So I will briefly describe the data slides I'm about to share. These are famous data. They're from the mid-90s. This is where the 30 million word gap movement came from. This is a Hart and Risley study that was conducted in Kansas. I think we have some people in Kansas on the call. That shows how achievement gaps are growing in the first 3 years of life. So you can see on the x-axis there, we're looking at children's age by month. The variable we're looking at is the number of words, so the vocabulary words that a child knows. Not surprisingly, there's not much of a gap in the first year of life because, spoiler alert, kids aren't really talking. They're babbling in the first year of life, but their vocabulary universally is pretty thin. But by the time we get to that stage of child development where kids are producing words and learning words, we can see the gap begin to widen and only grow exponentially. And again, these are showing the data compared to family income, with the blue being families in sort of professional families. These are at least twice the federal poverty level. Green representing those in working class families, and then the red representing children at or below the federal poverty level. So we see these achievement gaps appearing early in life. We have some really great federally funded studies, the early childhood longitudinal studies, that help us look at how achievement gaps are growing over time. And so what I am going to show you is our data from one of the ECLS-K studies. Actually, this is ECLS-B, where birth cohort, where the federal studies identified families with babies in the hospital and then followed the children as they grew. And there were different batteries of assessments given to the children. And so we are comparing the same population of children over time. When we look at this data set, we can see that the white versus black gap at 2 years of age was a little more than half a standard deviation. We're not going to get into statistics right now. I'll explain what the standard deviation represents in just a minute. That same group of kids at age 4, the gap had actually decreased. That's good news. We can talk about why it might look that way. But by kindergarten entry, it was right back up again to almost half a standard deviation. So that's a race gap. Let's look at family income again, comparing children in high socioeconomic status families, SES families, versus low. At age 2, that standard deviation was almost, or that achievement gap was almost a full standard deviation. At age 4 and at kindergarten entry. Now, just to put this in reality speak, that last green bar that I just put up, that achievement gap represents about a 16 to 18 month gap difference in skills and abilities. So these are 5-year-olds who are, some are displaying skills and abilities at what as 5-year-olds would be expected to, whereas others would be 16 to 18 months behind that. So that's a pretty substantive gap that appears at kindergarten entry. We then also, though, have great data, national data again, that help us see what's happening to kids in elementary school. We often focus on that achievement gap that we just need more pre-K to get kids, close that gap at kindergarten entry, but we can see what's happening to gaps in elementary schools as well. These are also nationally representative data. I'm just going to explain the first set of bars and then you can interpret it yourself for the rest. So these are showing, again, a longitudinal study. So we're looking at the same group of kids over time. These happen to be on math assessment scores. And the red bar represents the gap at first grade. And so the way we read this bar chart is that the bottom, if we look at the legend at the bottom SES, socioeconomic status quintile, so our lowest income first graders are doing 1.34 standard deviations worse than, that's why the bar points down, the top quintile based on socioeconomic status. So we have a fairly large gap in math at first grade. By 5th grade, the gap has increased just a wee bit. So we're not seeing these large increases in gaps, but nor are we seeing decreases in gaps, which is what I hope we believe that elementary schools and our public schools will be doing, is meeting kids where they are and then helping to close those achievement gaps. Those of you who are interested in gender issues, I do find this last set of bars somewhat interesting. We can see in first grade, boys are doing just a little bit worse than girls in math, but by 5th grade, boys are now doing better than girls in math. I find that interesting. This isn't just true in our academic skills. This national study also looked at social and emotional skills and behaviors, including attention and engagement. And we can see similar patterns play out, where gaps are increasing throughout the elementary school years as well. So I like to call myself an equal opportunity critic. This is not just an early childhood or birth to 5 problem. It's also an elementary school problem. We all need to be together concerned about these achievement gaps. Okay, now a quick reminder about some of the brain development and child development stuff that I'm sure you've already heard. We know the first years of life are when we have the most abundant brain development happening. Science lets us actually peek at inside brains now. So this is a snapshot of neurons in an infant at birth's brain. Remember, brain development, every synaptic connection, when those neurons meet each other, that is the architecture of all learning and development. And so at birth, we see this by age 6. So this is about first grade. We see this really dense neural mapping. there is a lot of learning and development going on. These little brains are exploding as they're gaining new knowledge, new skills, new behavior, new self-regulation. But by age 14, so adolescence, we see that thinning, a natural process in brain development, because our brains simply have to start specializing in order to be more efficient. So we see this pruning away of some skills and development. Key point in all of this is not just about academic or cognitive growth. We also need to be thinking about social and emotional skills, which is harder when we start thinking about assessment systems. Social and emotional skills are sometimes hard to measure, but they are incredibly important in understanding children's growth and development during these early years. My all-time, excuse me, my all-time favorite slide of all. If you look at the x-axis, we're looking at age, so birth to age 70. That red line is simply a line graph demonstrating that neural slide the neuron slide that I showed you a few minutes ago, that brain developments, or the malleability, the brain's ability to learn and change and grow, is at a peak earliest in life and then decreases over time. Really important though is the second line, which is not that we stop learning after the first few years of life. Of course, we're always learning. We are right now. But that lighter red line, the pink line that starts low, represents the effort it takes to rewire our brains, to learn new things, to learn new knowledge, to develop different skills. Anyone who's tried to learn a foreign language after age 20 probably will get this. So just take a minute, locate yourself on that slide. Let it assure you that the challenges we face are quite normal and developmentally appropriate. But the punchline in this alignment story is that our window of opportunity to really influence children's trajectories in school and in life aren't just a one-time intervention or a one-year program. We really have this continuum of time that we need to be thinking about, where we have the most opportunity to influence brain development at the lowest effort, or because you all are legislators, at the lowest cost. This is the difference between prevention and remediation efforts. All right, research though also tells us what to do about all of this. This is a very simplistic explanation of it, but I do want to make sure we hit the big ideas. First is, clearly we need to be thinking about providing high quality learning opportunities to children before they enter school, or pre-school. That's the P part of this P3 continuum. We know that preschool, high quality Head Start, childcare, infant toddler home visitation, all of those services provided to children before school matter. We also know that high quality full day kindergarten matters. I'm highlighting this because full day kindergarten is still not a funded guarantee in many states. Happy to talk more about that at a different time, but I think full day kindergarten is an incredibly important part of this equation. And then we also, though, need to be intentionally thinking about the kinds of opportunities being provided to children in those primary grades of first, second, and third grade. If we're going to sustain the gains that we're seeing from high quality pre-K programs, we have to be following it with high quality early grades in elementary schools. And so sort of the magic formula in all of this is that the timing of when we start thinking about high quality learning matters. The earlier, the better. In some states, it's thinking about pre-K for 4-year-olds. In other states, it's thinking about pre-K for 3-year-olds. In other states, it's thinking about universal access to home visitation or family leave or other sort of policy supports for children with infants and toddlers. So the earlier we think about this, the better. the quality of what we provide matters. It's not that just any old program helps. We have to be thinking about the quality of programming. That's a dissertation in and of itself, so I'm going to leave it there for right now. But then again, this magic sauce of alignment and systems work is thinking about it in a dosage sort of effect. That it's, are we exposing children to these high quality learning opportunities, not just at a point in time, but day to day, year after year? Is it that they're getting an accumulation of high quality learning opportunities during these most formative years? And so this is sort of a conceptual framework for what this P3 work looks like. Is if you look at the colorful band of arrows, we're thinking about a continuum of time. And we're really striving to formulate policies and ensure those policies are implemented well within each of those age or grade levels. But then we're also creating meaningful alignment and continuity across those age or grade levels. Okay, part 2. The reality, though, is when we look at this system, it doesn't really function as a system. In all of our states, we have a birth to 5 system that in and of itself is composed of state-funded pre-K, Head Start, childcare, family childcare. In many states, there are a human services legislative committee, perhaps, that really governs a lot of this birth to 5 system. In contrast to the K-12 system or pre-K to 12 system, which has its own governance arrangements with state education agencies, but we know this is a highly decentralized system in every state with local school boards and LEAs really holding control for pre-K to 12 systems. So in reality, it's harder to think systemically, which means it requires all of us, you as policymakers, us as researchers and policy supporters, to be thinking intentionally and strategically about alignment. So quick snapshot of the birth to 5 system. Again, if you have not seen these pie charts, we can make sure you have access to them for your own state. We see that children are in a variety of programs in those years just prior to kindergarten. All of these programs matter, the quality of them matter. What's, I think, most interesting and challenging from a policy perspective is thinking about this third of 4-year-olds, this is again national data, who are not in any kind of formal program, which means they're probably home with mom, auntie, neighbors, we call it family, friend, and neighbor care. They are in settings that are likely not governed by any sort of state policy or program. Moving now up to thinking about aligning across these systems. Again, this is a bit of a complicated slide, but I'll just take 2 minutes to explain it. We have increasing amounts of research that show that the content alignment of what children are getting in their pre-K programs compared to what they're getting in kindergarten is not well aligned. And so this is a large scale study, not nationally representative, but large scale study that looks at content domains between those pre-K and K classroom experiences. And those bars represent the percentage, the amount of content that is redundant, meaning it's the same, meaning they learned it in pre-K and then they learned it again in kindergarten. And from a learning standpoint, this is one of the reasons we hypothesize we're not closing achievement gaps, is we keep continuing to meet the lowest common denominator in classrooms rather than helping to differentiate instruction to move all children to their next level of development and growth. So when we look at content redundancy, from a policy perspective, we see misalignment between curriculum, between assessments, between teacher professional learning. We also see misalignment just in the classroom experience itself. There are fascinating tools and studies going on now that are actually looking at time use inside classrooms. This is a time use study using an instrument called Snapshot. And it looks literally, they follow kids and track minute by minute how they're spending their time in classrooms. Without even reading the small print, just compare the colors. We see a pretty jarring difference between children's classroom experiences. They have large amount of choice in pre-K and then practically no choice in kindergarten. They have a little tiny amount of whole group instruction, 10% in pre-K, more than half in kindergarten. This is important only because when we, again, think back to child development, these are the years when kids are figuring out, what does learning mean? What does school feel like? How do I self-regulate in these settings? What can I expect from teachers? What can I expect from my peers? And when we're giving children these jarring differences of what school and learning feels like, it's very disruptive to children's own growth and learning. So this would be another area of misalignment, is just how do we think about the experience of educational opportunities across this timeline. Last bit of reality is, again, this is a large scale study, not nationally representative, but this does look at diverse populations, including rural and urban, and it also has broad diversity in student population. Is when we look at sort of a gross level, we see that in the high stakes grade levels, so these would be the tested years when kids are being expected to take standardized tests, is where the highest performing teachers are assigned. Whereas in the primary grades, kindergarten through second grade, or the non-tested years, is where the lowest performing teachers are assigned. Now, I always have to be quick to say, of course, there are fantastic K-2 teachers all across the country. But when we look at statistical differences and we see that low performing teachers are in those most essential and formative years, it raises questions and concerns. I'm going to skip that slide for now. I'm running out of time because I want to get to the good news that there are places doing this well, some of the possibilities of creating alignment. It's really starting to think in two different ways. First is we need to keep thinking about our birth to 5 programs and services and finding ways to support children and their families to be ready to succeed in school. So these are investments in state-funded pre-K and high-quality childcare. But then we also need to be thinking about ensuring that our school systems are ready to support children no matter how they show up. And so we have some highlights of places that have done this really well. I want to start with one. This is Montgomery County Public Schools. As many of you know, it's a suburb of Washington, D.C. It's one of the largest school districts in the country, which is good news for us. This means this happened at scale. It also has hugely diverse population. It has some of the highest income zip codes and some of the lowest income zip codes in the nation. They had a new superintendent take over around 2001, who said, we have some of the largest achievement gaps in the country. I want to change that. His P3 approach to shifting the district is represented here. I'm going to start at the bottom. He really embraced all of those different pre-K settings, not just the public pre-K programs that were inside school districts, but he also looked at community-based pre-K, home-based care, and he brought them all in to help be part of this vision of children's learning and development. He created summer programs. Nobody wants to go to summer school. Everybody wants to go to summer camp. So he created these summer camp experiences in between grade levels from pre-K through 3rd grade. They were staffed and taught by classroom teachers who were the academic year teachers. He also created after-school programs to support young children. But then more importantly is all of this text on the right, is the district adopted aligned curriculum from pre-K through third grade. They had formative assessments from pre-K through third grade. They created teacher teams, not just grade level teams, but across grade level teams. They had very deep family engagement strategies to ensure that families were partners in all of this work. Here's what happened. This is achievement third grade, so state assessment data during those early years of implementing this. So I told you he took over in about 2001. Here you see data starting in 2003, so just 2 years after implementation. And then over time, because we all know it takes time for policy changes to be implemented and to sort of get people trained up and bought in and implementing as intended. And so you can see these are trend lines we want to see. We want to see all of the different subpopulations trending upwards, but we also want to see the gaps closing. And so you can see in those first few years of implementation, Montgomery County was able to close achievement gaps at third grade. Another complicated slide, and I'm happy to share these slides so you can review and make sense of them more later. This is where I think policymakers are most interested, is what's the long-term payoff of this kind of work? This slide represents some really important findings from Montgomery County. I'm going to say it slowly twice. At the end of high school, so children who had that P3 experience, but then continued through Montgomery County Public Schools, when they graduated from high school, African-American males had higher high school graduation rates, higher ACT scores, higher college going rates than the national average of all white kids. One more time, African-American males outperformed the national average of white kids on many measures of high school success. That is compelling. One example is good, two are always better. So I want to point out one more. This is Chicago Public Schools, another big district, hard to argue with. It's not a scaled approach. They have actually been doing a P3 approach, frankly, since the mid-60s. It was part of the war on poverty, called Child Parent Centers. That's what that CPC stands for. So they too implemented a robust aligned approach where they had robust engagement of pre-K teachers and families. They had family centers embedded within the elementary schools. They had aligned curriculum, intensive professional learning for teachers. It was a bit of a natural experiment because not all Chicago elementary schools implemented this, so we can compare those that did versus those that did not. On the left-hand side, you can see what happened at third grade test scores. Those who had the P3 or pre-K through third grade approach outperformed their peers at third grade. On the right-hand side, you can see those gains were sustained into middle school. Those who had a pre-K through third grade approach still outperformed their peers. And then again, here's where policymakers are usually most interested. Same color scheme. Purple represents those that did have the approach. Those that had a pre-K through third grade approach had less grade retention and less special education placement than their peers. This is where the money is. This is the payoff between prevention and remediation later. Okay, so last couple of slides, and then I want to take any questions. One of the challenges in this work is that we tend to focus on kids. We want the outcomes for kids, but who we really need to be focusing on if we want those child outcomes are the adults and organizations and systems that serve those young kids. And so this is my center's theory of change, is that if we're going to change child and student outcomes, we have to really first think about teacher capabilities. Are teachers equipped to provide the kinds of high quality, differentiated learning experiences that we know young children need? Teachers, though, are supported by administrators, well, whether it be elementary school principals, center program directors in early childhood. And we know that administrators really are supported by larger organizational and system capacity. And so we need to be thinking more about how we support these adults in the system before we keep measuring students wondering what we're doing wrong. There are a number of resources behind all of this. I'm just going to flash a few by. There are many efforts around the country to think about improving elementary school principals, knowledge and skills to support early learning in the early grades. There are a number of case studies that also highlight promising strategies. This is one related to Montgomery County, who you just heard about. There's a book about what's happened in Boston public schools. There have been major studies in school districts in California. University of Colorado, Denver, we actually run a P3 leadership certificate program. It's a 10-month program for administrators to really deepen their skills and knowledge around this work. So there's a lot of effort to think about boosting adult knowledge and behaviors in this space, including this fellows program. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you. The closing thought I want to leave you with, though, is the picture that I said was my favorite, but with a new little twist. When we're thinking about adults, we're on that other end. And so we need more than flyby workshops. We need more than one-time webinars. We really need deeply intensive and intentional ways to support teachers, school administrators, program directors, school district central offices, state legislators, and others to be thinking in new ways about how to support this continuum of learning. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my slide and I'm going to look at chat, and also feel free to unmute. I don't know how you all like to facilitate Q&A. Let's see, I see Representative Gray. Yes, go ahead. I can multitask usually. Ask questions and I'll try and.
Yeah, Representative Gray or Senator Lucia, either feel free to unmute.
Okay. Thank you so much for such an excellent presentation. So the slides that you showed with the learning gap between the Black and white population, and as we know, there are varying shades of color as well. So I'm curious whether where did the brown children fall under? Is it whether with the Black or the white? And then corollary to that question too is, so we are a land of immigrants, right? So we have, and so I'm curious whether you think that in your research that flattening or where does that configure over a period of time with that gap? Because would that mean that that might be one of the reasons why there may not be as much of a big difference despite our best efforts?
That's a great question. Multiple good questions. To your first question about Black and brown children, this is a new frontier in research. Researchers are increasingly leaning into the need to be more precise in the kinds of disaggregation we look at. Specific to those NAEP data, the brown kids appeared in the largely in the Hispanic population, but to your point, some of those data that I shared were problematic because they did not gather data on the difference between native English speakers and dual language learners. And so even those Hispanic data were a little conflated and didn't really totally address some of the intersectionality that we know exists. And so I always try to say that we have to be critical of data, as you are, but also realize that we need to be using the best data we have at our hands in order to start making better decisions. And so I think researchers are striving to be more precise around that, and there's a long way to go. To your second question about immigrants, another good one. It's another reason I think, and this is such a long answer, I'll try to keep it short. This is another reason we have to be thinking about the full continuum, is we can't design systems that say, well, whoops, you missed attending pre-K in the United States, so you're just going to have to figure out how to catch up, when you do arrive in second grade. It's why we need this continuum approach, so that we do have shared approaches, shared teacher strategies that will help to address kids no matter how they show up and when they show up. That's one of the biggest challenges in our K-12 system, I would argue in particular. Without getting into, sort of education history, our K-12 system was very much designed to be a standardizing system. We had common schools. They were created to assimilate children into common knowledge and understandings as we were going through the Industrial Revolution. We're obviously seeing very negative effects of that for a number of populations historically, and it's tragic, but we're still in this K-12 system of standardized. This is where we need to start shifting. How can the K-12 system begin to be more differentiated so that we are responding to children, again, with the skills they show up with when they show up, and not just try to cram them into grade level standards? So that was a very rough answer to your question, Senator, but it's an important one. And it's why, we need to be thinking about not just 1 year, but a systems approach.
Excellent. May I follow up with you later on? Because I know the time is very limited.
Absolutely.
So I'll get your contact info from NCSL folks. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Aloha.
Christy, I know you're short on time. I see 2 more questions. Do you have time, or should we ask?
No, we can do them quick.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to call on Senator Kano from Rhode Island. And Chris,
Thank you so much.
I've got a request. I'm sorry, Senator Kano, one second. I've got a request if you could share the listserv email address, I think that you had on your very last slide as well. That'd be great.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very great. One of the questions that I do have is also related a little bit to the question that the senator said. When you talk about support systems, in Rhode Island, we have a very diverse population. So there's families with socioeconomic status and immigration status that have a lot of barriers when it comes to the language, and they may not have the literacy to support the students at any level of their education. So do you know if this holistic support system approach that you talked about included information in different languages for the families, and is there any advice that you have for more equity to access to those resource programs for families that may not be as comfortable or may not understand the language? So how can we do this continued approach, is my question, for families that are very usually disengaged, or because their immigration status or socioeconomic status, they're not able to support the students at any level of their development?
Yeah. Again, a really important question that I wish we had 4 years to talk about together. Yes, given the diversity of both of those examples that I just shared with you, Montgomery County and Chicago, because of the size of them, there were absolutely intentional, multilingual, multicultural strategies embedded throughout all of that. I would argue that I myself have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with this sort of engaged families part of this work, because I feel like so often our systems talk about families in ways that blame them, that they're not providing enough support, that they're not, doing the right home activities, that they're not. This is another area of real growth in P3 strategies right now, is imagining and then implementing really culturally preserving family engagement strategies, where it's not only giving information to families in their home language or meeting them where they are in that respect, but also being much more open to hearing from families about the strengths that they bring, the kinds and diversity of learning opportunities that they are providing to families. I will make a note when I send my slide deck. I will add a couple of really great reports that have recently come out. One just was released 2 or 3 weeks ago from Carnegie around family engagement strategies in this P3 space.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to reading it.
And then one last question, I think Representative Wozlowick, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just noted in one of your slides that you had like one of the ends of the sort of spectrum was districts. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to what we as legislators can do, because there's a lot of, right, districts have a lot of the control over what things they do in their district. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what we can do in our roles.
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, it's going to vary a little bit from state to state because the sort of governance arrangement between SEAs and the rest of state government are different. I, for one, my home state, Colorado, and CSL's home state is a state where we have an independently elected school board that is not part of the governor's, and the commissioner is not part of the governor's cabinet. So there's different levels of influence. I do believe that legislators are key to this. One of them, just to be very timely, is in helping to influence how we're thinking about the use of all of these American Rescue Plan dollars right now. There is a lot of influence there that LEAs have to be not putting their finger in the dike, but to be thinking upstream. So for example, using some of those ARP dollars, ESSER dollars to be thinking about different kinds of professional learning for their central office staff or their elementary school principals, different kinds of strategies for professional learning among teachers. Representative, I will also make a note to share with you. My center has just completed what we call a district P3 audit tool. It's a tool to really understand what districts at that district level can and should be doing to support this alignment work. There are absolutely legislative implications in there in terms of, again, thinking about professional learning for administrators, thinking about supports for the learning environments themselves, the school buildings, the classrooms. And this is where I think state legislation and state legislators can be encouraging and innovative for giving LEAs permission to make decisions that I think they often feel constrained that they are not permitted to do because of school finance laws or other pieces of legislation. So again, a question I wish we had 3 hours to discuss together, but I'll try and provide some follow-up resources to help disentangle some of that.
Thank you.
Christy, thank you so much. I know you've got to run and you've got school starting and so much on your plate. So thanks everyone for your great questions. If we didn't get to it, if we missed it, please do send it to Alice and Melissa or I, and we'll make sure we get it to Christy and we'll follow up with all those great resources.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It was great being with all of you.
Thanks, Christy.
All right, bye.
Hand it over to Patrick. We're a little bit behind schedule, so Patrick's gonna speed up his comments, please. So
Sorry.
No, I never want to slow down the conversation. So really welcome it. But I'll hand it over to Patrick. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. As Jenny said, we have kind of burned down the agenda, so we're going to move a little quickly through this. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me yet, my name is Patrick Lyons. I'm a policy specialist here on the education team at NCSL, working on pre-K to 3rd grade policy, and also voted least looking like my profile photo that you saw earlier. It's been a long pandemic. Anyway, I'm excited to share today an overview of legislation from across the country. We're going to fly around and look at different bills. I'm going to try as much as I can to make connections to what you just heard about. And so our goal here is just to kind of highlight where we're seeing trends in the P3 space. The other idea is that as you're finishing your fellows program, in the same way that kids transition from pre-K to the next grade, we are now kind of transitioning you a little bit into my world of P3 work. So today we're going to talk a little bit about kindergarten readiness and attendance. As you heard from Dr. Cowers, kindergarten is critically important. And so states are starting to rethink who needs to be at kindergarten and how we decide who's ready for kindergarten. We're also going to talk about some COVID recovery plans. Now, the important thing here is a lot of these bills were passed at a time when we thought we were recovering from COVID instead of continuing to mitigate. But there are a lot of things in here about learning loss. And as the doctor mentioned, ways to use some of this new recovery money and ways to really close gaps for kids, particularly at-risk kids. And then we're going to talk about one bill that's focused on literacy instruction. I had an opportunity to talk to some of you yesterday in our breakout groups, and I know literacy is an important topic in many states. And so I'm going to show one example as just a jumping off point for a larger discussion on literacy, because many state legislatures are taking a look at particularly the curriculum involved in literacy in their state. So kindergarten readiness and assessment. The first bill I want to talk about is out of Iowa Senate Bill 1075. Now, what this does is it establishes a 4-week kindergarten jumpstart program for children who don't do as well as we'd hope on the kindergarten assessment. Now, this is only for districts who do a kindergarten assessment. I don't know if every district in the state does it. This program also includes training for parents on different ways that they can interact with their child to improve overall success. One thing that I think is important to note here, well, I guess what I mean to say is there's another bill out of New Jersey that is similar, but it's pending. It hasn't been enacted yet. This bill would create a 4-year pilot program where they're going to have 15 school districts from across the state participate, and they are going to put together a 6-week program focused on language, literacy, and mathematics for rising kindergarten students. Again, this is focused on reaching at-risk populations. So to be eligible, students must be at or student family income must be at or below 85% of the state median income. Additional criteria are that the student has not attended a state-funded preschool program for a full year prior to joining this rising kindergarten program. However, if they've attended for half a year, that is still acceptable. Additionally, they can have attended a state-funded pre-camp program if the provider there recommends that they then be part of this 6-week summer program. Additionally, the eligibility can be met by belonging to one of the following groups, including English language learners, having an IEP, being in a resource family home, which for those of you who aren't familiar is a new kind of terminology for foster care, or being a child who is experiencing homelessness. Lastly, as we start talking about the importance of kindergarten, I want to bring up this bill out of Louisiana. Starting in the 22-23 school year, in order to be eligible to attend first grade, a student must have attended kindergarten, a full day kindergarten for a full school year, and pass an academic readiness assessment. However, there is significant flexibility for localities to determine what it means to be ready for first grade and to design their own assessments. Additionally, there is some flexibility because the ruling says you have to be, if you turn 5 by September 30th, you must enroll in kindergarten. However, September 30th is after the start of the school year. So if you're a case where the child is at the start of school year 4, but will turn 5 by September 30th, you have an option to delay entrance. Additionally, you can decide to opt out of kindergarten and send your child to a pre-K program. And assumedly, then the child would take the assessment before moving on to first grade, or depending on age, could do kindergarten. And lastly, if parents don't feel that their child is ready for in-school, there are resources available for homeschooling. One thing I wanted to also mention here is if I'm mentioning a bill that is in your state or that you sponsored and you want to mention anything about it, please just interrupt, raise your hand. Happy to hear some more context around some of these things. And especially if I get it wrong, please correct me. COVID-19 recovery. So like I said, these were bills that were passed last session, so they really do not have much bearing on back to school that we're experiencing now. Just keep that in mind. First one, out of Arkansas, the creation of the Arkansas Tutoring Corps for K through 6 students in math and reading. This is an area where they've used relief funds to fund this effort, including the elementary and secondary school emergency relief program, as well as the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, which both are eligible for this because there's carve-outs in those programs for learning loss remediation. And so this falls firmly under that. This program is going to be staffed by a mix of college students who could be earning credit to be tutors, most likely students who are studying education. But there is also plans that will be developed to provide compensation and stipends for qualified tutors in certain districts. And the tutoring will all happen in school buildings or virtually. So they're offering both those options. Tennessee House Bill 7004. This was a larger effort that does include a tutoring core, the Tennessee Accelerating Literacy and Learning Core. But what this also did is put forth a lot of funding to do summer and after school learning camps to help students who may have fallen behind over the last year. Differently as well, instead of using emergency relief fund, this is funded with TANF dollars. The idea being that potentially that is more sustainable long term. The learning loss programs I mentioned, there's 3 different types. There's a bridge and a summer camp, which is either 4 or 6 weeks before the start of the school year. And it's 5 days a week, 4 hours of in-person instruction, particularly focused on reading and math. Now there's also a mini camp, which is an after-school program, 4 days a week, about an hour of instruction. And these ones are specifically focused on STEM. So Tennessee has launched this over the summer. We hope to be able to follow up maybe with some evaluation results of how it's gone. Additionally, part of this funding was put aside to develop a new assessment product to be able to test how much students have potentially lost over the COVID period, but particularly to really gauge the progress back to where they should be. And lastly, I want to talk about this literacy bill. So this is a bill out of the Arkansas Senate. It's been passed. And now what this bill does is it bans public school districts and public charters from using curriculum in K-2 literacy courses that revolves around the 3 queuing system model of reading, which you see here in these Venn diagram. Supposedly the center is efficient reading. This is a model, and I'm sure there are experts who can speak even in more depth to this, but it's a model that's been around for a long time, but has largely in the last 20 to 30 years been debunked. Basically, this is the model of teaching kids to read almost exclusively through context clues and to make educated guesses, which is problematic, of course, because that requires a lot of memorization. It requires a lot of outside knowledge. More so, people are moving to what they call, a phonics-based, where instead of having kids guess at words, you teach them more skills to sound things out. And then context clues become the secondary way of verifying or checking the word that you've sounded out, if perhaps it is an obscure word or is pronounced slightly differently than you might see on the paper. This is an area that we hope to dive more into. I want to draw your attention to the Colorado READ Act as well. That's another state that is doing a lot to think about what curriculum is being put forth to their students around reading and making sure that the curriculum that they're using is evidence-based. And so in the Colorado program, there's a lot of money for helping teachers get additional professional development, those who are already in the field, and then working with colleges to change the way they teach literacy instruction to new teachers. Lastly, with this Arkansas bill, there is a little bit of a punishment if you do not want to change your standards. First, the district will say you are in violation of these standards and give you an opportunity to rectify. But if you don't, they are willing to withhold 10% of your monthly state foundation funding to either the public school or charter. So that was a really quick overview of just some legislation in the pre-K to 3rd grade space. I'm really excited to hear what questions you may have. Yes, Senator Alvarado, I will get you information on the Tennessee bill. I see that in the chat. That is also, yeah, that's a great thing too. Like I said, these were really short views on this. So if there are things you want to know more of, let me know. I can put my email in the chat too right now if you have questions about P3 stuff. Okay.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
No problem.
That helped everyone sort of see as I feel like Christy's discussion really helped us think, broadly, systems-wise, and then you really brought it home with the legislation about what these changes can look like, how the legislature has an impact in this P3 space. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I see one more question from Representative Damith about the Tennessee bill. So we'll for sure follow up. Allison, are you back?
I'm back. So here's what we're gonna do, everyone. Usually when we're in person, as we're getting our lunch buffet plates put together, we stand in a group and we smile and we take a photo and we're all happy that we're in person. Since we're not in person, I'm gonna ask if everyone who hears me right now that's in front of their computer can enable their camera so we can see your pretty faces. We're all just gonna smile for a while and Riley is gonna take a few shots. And then we're gonna take a quick break and we're gonna start back up at 11:10 Mountain Time, so 1:10 Eastern Time. Sound good? I see a couple cameras coming on. Any other takers to be part of the picture? Oh, yep. Come on, Commissioner, be part of our picture. All right. Are we good, Riley?
Just one more second. Hold on, everybody. All right, we got it.
Thank you all for humoring us. We will share this through the listserv. I know sometimes folks like to, tweet out what they're doing and whatnot. So this will be nice to share that you were part of this learning cohort. So we'll see you back here at 10 past the hour, okay? You want to get us started?
Yes. Well, I feel like I've been teeing this conversation up for a while now. I'm so excited to have Commissioner Beth Bai with us today. I'm going to see, Allison, do you mind stopping sharing? And you can pin us if you don't mind. So, Commissioner, yesterday I mentioned to everyone that you were a child care provider,
Yeah.
legislator, now commissioner, and I just think you've got such a great, unique perspective. I believe you were part of the first Early Learning Fellows cohort.
Yeah, I was.
And so we've evolved a little bit over the years. I think I shared with you, we're now Early Childhood Fellows, trying to take a broader lens on family support, paid leave, and housing and homelessness. We've talked about all those things that really help families with young children. So a little bit different than it was, but we'd love to just hear, how you arrived in your current role and sort of what your priorities were upon becoming commissioner, making that
Sure, I'm so happy to be here, and I apologize about the miscommunication. Last time I was supposed to be here, I was actually presenting on another webinar and thought they were the same thing. So happy to be here, and thank you for what you all do. I know how hard the job is and how low the compensation is for the most part, unless you're from New York or California. It's pretty rough. But I got to be in this role. I was appointed by Governor Lamont when he was elected in January. I was not anticipating it. I was anticipating being chair of the Education Committee in the Senate. I had previously been Appropriations Chair and was looking forward to being Education Chair. But when the governor calls and you have a chance to run an agency that I had helped develop when I was in the House and Senate. I was a legislator. Having been a child care provider, I was reporting to 5 different agencies between the way Connecticut was structured, and had been saying that we could benefit from a single agency focused on early childhood. So to have a chance to run that agency was very exciting. I was a toddler teacher in college, a biology major, started working at a parent co-op on campus and fell in love with it. Really had a deep interest in research, worked on the IHDP program, which looked at the impact of medical and educational interventions with premature babies. Those kids are now 50 years old. I'm very old. Well, they're not quite 50, but they're old. And then also did some research comparing different states. So we compared Virginia, North Carolina, and Massachusetts, and how their childcare regulations impacted the quality. That was in graduate school, working for Kathy McCartney, who's now the president of Smith College. And then went on to be a childcare teacher and director, and then program developer. Ran for local school board, for many reasons, but part of it was to make sure early childhood had a seat at the table. And the local school board, ran for State House after that, and have always served on the Education Committee, and then ran for the Senate. So then Governor Lamont appointed me. That's how I got here.
Wow. And so I love what you said about helping to design the office itself. So what were your priorities, I suppose, when you first?
Yeah, the priorities were to try to simplify. You know, over years, government gets complex, and we really do, as legislators, have opportunities to look from a different point of view, because you're representing constituents who are interacting with the government versus people who are working in the bureaucracy who just see their lens. So I was really able to show how, you know, having to be licensed by the Department of Public Health, and then sort of have the education part regulated by education, then be dealing with DDS, Department of Developmental Services for Children with Disabilities. There were 5 different agencies that as a director I had to interact with every day, and they were all asking me for the same information in different ways. And I felt that if we looked at the child and the family from a single agency's point of view, that would work better. And I'll say, I feel so lucky to be commissioner, because we've really been able to do things like connect home visiting with childcare, right? I mean, and being at the cabinet level, you know, when we Head Start had a federal program, but has a focus on housing and families that are struggling with housing, we can have the commissioner of housing say, hey, we've got 150 vouchers we can give to Head Start, and really connecting sort of the human services. And when we knew families were struggling getting formula, we could work with WIC and say, hey, during the pandemic, food stamps were up 100%, but WIC participation was down. We could know these things because of all the programs being in one place. So there are a lot of advantages to having an office of early childhood. I think the biggest is our focus on the whole family. You know, we talk about family values, and then we split them up. We split up, the parents get this here and the children get this here. In our core mission of the office is that we are to develop 2-generation approaches, and that we've just developed a family cabinet, a parent cabinet, so that, you know, it's not just the childcare providers with a voice as we're developing childcare systems. We have parents who have a governance and advisory role to us when we're developing programs. And I think that family focus has made a really big difference. That's what early childhood providers do the best. And I think that's what our agency does best.
That's great to hear. In our previous speaker was talking about sort of pre-K to grade 3 continuum, and or no, I shouldn't say pre-K, she was saying preschool. So anything before school,
yes,
including childcare. So I'm curious, I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't think I had thought of this before, but I'm just curious if you might be able to speak about how that works in Connecticut with the education department.
It's a really, really important framework, the pre-K to 3 framework. And I'm afraid not enough states are embracing the pre-K to 3 framework. Like, we think we should be pushing down elementary school into early childhood. And in fact, we need to be pushing up the best of early childhood into elementary as well. And I think the pre-K to 3 framework does a super job of that. We work very closely with the State Department of Education. For example, we align our curriculum frameworks with theirs. We align our assessment framework with theirs to make sure there's a smooth transition right from preschool through 3rd grade. And in fact, now as we're using the Ages and Stages questionnaire from birth, that really goes from birth to age 6. And so that's a nice entry point of school. So I think that's really important, is that connection. So we're in the same building. We're on a floor below the State Department of Education. And I think being close to them is important. But so is being close to the Department of Social Services, and that those home visiting dollars and the Medicaid dollars. We don't think of Medicaid as supporting education, but let me tell you, you know, the ability, we're working now on being able to use Medicaid dollars to expand our home visiting funding significantly. So I think we can't underestimate how the whole family and all their needs can come together, and having an agency focused helps that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pause real quick and let, I think Senator Miss Alusha had a question. Do you want to unmute, Senator?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So Commissioner, this issue came up yesterday, and I thought I'd give you the opportunity to, address it. And I raised the issue about our care providers who there's ARPA dollars available. However, they may have some issues with their business, whether it be where they're not able to pay state taxes or they're behind. There's also some issues on some licensing. I don't know, whatever it may be. Now, within the bounds of the law and what they can, I'm kind of curious whether you have some creative ways by which we can at least provide them, because they're the ones who really are in need of this federal dollars, and yet they're the ones who may not necessarily may be deprived of it because of some of those issues. So in your experience, are there tactics that we can do to give them the support that they need?
Senator, you make such an important point, because unlike the public schools, we're looking at a really complicated public-private system with a lot of private businesses. The pandemic has really taught us some things. And one thing is we've connected with, we formed a contract with the Small Business Association, something called the Women's Business Development Center in Connecticut, but it's a women-focused SBA nonprofit in Connecticut. And we use some of our relief funds so that they're available to help the childcare centers that are struggling with their business, to help them with some of the very basics of running a business. And also, our stabilization dollars, we got out very quickly, but they went out to every licensed center. There was nobody who was deprived of the funding. We sent them to any program that was licensed with our agency, got between $700 and $1,000 per child in grant money to help them pay their staff, sometimes catch up with over half of programs in Connecticut had to borrow money just to stay open during the pandemic. So they had to catch up with some of their debt. So I encourage you in your state, most states have not sent the funds out, but I do think, to your point, Senator, we've got to be, one of our core principles with those funds was give programs the benefit of the doubt. Don't get held up with 19 bureaucratic questions. Keep it simple, assume that people need the help, and get the dollars out as quickly as possible.
I see a couple more questions. I do want to give you a chance, Commissioner Bai, before I call on the other folks. Response to COVID. I know Christine from CLASP, who was with us in July, really wanted us to ask, make sure we asked you about how Connecticut has really centered equity in your response, and sort of just the innovations you all have really taken on in response to COVID. So
Sure. I'm sure, like many of your states, Connecticut has an incredible wealth gap where we have some of the wealthiest people in the country and some of the poorest communities in the country. And COVID did not hit those communities in a similar way. So I don't know, Jenny, if I can share my screen, but it might help if while I'm talking, sometimes I know the way I learn, it's listening and looking. So I can share my screen and explain how we, hold on one sec. I'm going to explain how we use the Social Vulnerability Index to make sure the funds were distributed equitably. So SVI is a census tool that was used in Connecticut to figure out where to focus our efforts on vaccine. And the thing we really liked so this is where the pandemic really helped different agencies work together. We'd never heard of SVI before in early childhood, in our Office of Early Childhood, but it puts together all these variables: socioeconomic status, household composition, minority status, and housing type, to sort of create a risk index. And this is just to show you what's in it. But what we did was we asked the University of Connecticut to plot out every child care center by by SBI and by race. So what you'll see on the left side is Black, Indigenous, people of color population along the left axis, and then social vulnerability along the right. So the programs that you'll see in orange and blue, these are programs where these are programs located in communities where the most vulnerable populations live, and where, and I don't necessarily love that word, I don't know if it's the right way of me to say it, but these communities we know were disproportionately impacted by COVID. So we basically gave, as I told you, a grant of about $650 per child. But then if a program was located in a level 1 equity bonus area, they got a 25% bonus. And if they were in a level 2 equity bonus area, they got a 35% bonus. We also bonused quality. So if a program was accredited, NAYC accredited, they got a bonus. If they served infants and toddlers, they got a bonus. And we simply used licensed capacity. We didn't do any big surveys about what's your enrollment now, because we knew enrollment was all over the place. And then we also wanted to make sure that by bonusing social vulnerability, that we weren't, by bonusing accreditation, that it wasn't going to just wipe out the social vulnerability bonus. So we also mapped the state, and we saw that we have plenty of accredited centers in low income areas. So I just use that to show that we took it seriously. The governor wanted us to be sure that the communities that had suffered disproportionately would get funding. And working with, if you have a large research university or your agencies do, they're really helpful in these situations. So that's how we used equity, and we also weighed quality, and we weighed if you were serving a population like infants and toddlers, it just costs a lot more. So that was our equity approach.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I've got more questions about COVID I want to ask, but I'm going to open it up.
Sure.
Delegate Solomon from.
I'm glad they're questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Delegate.
Thank you, and Commissioner, thank you for your work. You all were really leaders in the COVID response. Frankly, I wish the state of Maryland had embraced a similar strategy that you all had. Sort of had a question for you from your perspective. You know, kind of working through the years. One of the issues, and I'll admit, I voted for this bill. We have sort of a transformational piece of legislation that we passed last year that's going to create universal pre-K and get us on the road to universal preschool. And I've been working a lot with our family childcare providers, and there's, you know, fairly rigorous educational requirements in order for them to be part of the pre-K program. Requires that 50% of the pre-K be with private providers to keep the mixed delivery system. And I've been hearing more and more from family providers that, you know, it's basically going to price them out. You know, if you're a family provider that doesn't have a bachelor's degree, are you really going to go back and get one? And I'm just sort of curious, in your experience, if, you know, I know Connecticut's been at the forefront of this kind of work as well, like what's your take on that balance between, you know, sort of a degree or a credential that doesn't necessarily, I mean, having a bachelor's degree, I'll be honest, as a new dad, does not necessarily mean that you're going to be great with kids. And, you know, are we really leaving some of potentially the best providers out who are serving those really hard to get populations by putting in a requirement that may not mean a whole lot? I was just sort of curious your sense of that and your take.
It's a really great question, and just such a point of tension, because we want to have standards for people who do professional work, and we want to have access for families. But we know that traditionally in early childhood education, those degrees have not been required. So we have some in the workforce 20 years who may be some of the best teachers. And you're trying to make policy that says, over time, what does the data show about what's the appropriate credential to lead to better outcomes for children? And so sometimes those two things run into each other. I think every state is in for a shock if the federal bill passes with the funding for universal preschool and childcare. And they're both coming through HHS. And I think every state's going to have to reckon with family childcare as a part of the system. just today, Jenny, you may be able to find this quickly. NEAR came out with a report about don't forget family childcare in your system building. In Connecticut, what we've done to build a structure, like we're really lucky we started the system building, and it sounds like Maryland did too, before all these funds came. We have something called staff family childcare networks, and some of your states may too. But during COVID, we had an individual stand up and give us $1 million to stand these up during COVID. So we went from having 5 networks to 12. So now every family childcare in the state has support from an organization designed to help them improve their quality. And also, just as importantly to the senator's earlier question, to build a business. A lot of these family childcare homes don't even have profit and loss statements. And now they're connecting with the Small Business Association. They have a network, and we're paying all their fees to get accredited, and also supporting them with coaching and professional development. We had a 12-hour-a-day line that they could call into with their health questions during COVID. But these family childcare providers, I think, given the appropriate supports, and I do think they need shared services and supports, could play a critical role in UPK. And it also takes convincing of the school districts, because schools don't understand early childhood. And I've had superintendents say to me, that's not going to be school readiness in my town. School readiness is in a classroom. And so that's where we have to, I think as legislators, you can lean into standards versus places. You know, if programs can help children reach those standards, and most of them are really getting ready for school, and then support. I mean, these family childcare homes are going to need support to get the credentials they need. And I do believe that ultimately we're going to have to require a certain credential if we're going to pay the salaries that we're going to pay. But we have to give time and scholarship money and make the pathway easier. We make it really difficult in Connecticut. You know, we're doing some things well, but like you all, we have a lot of struggles. And we want to really shift to buying classes and cohorts and helping make it easier for programs to access those classes and family childcare providers to access. And we've learned a lot about online PD, and Erickson has been a really great partner for us. So Jared, I'm glad you're thinking about them. I should say Delegate Solomon. I'm glad you're thinking about them because don't forget about them. They're such important resources in the communities that they live and work in, and we have to support them.
Yeah, I mean, we passed a bill. I authored a bill based on a model that we have in Montgomery County, Maryland, to promote the growth of them. But I feel like on the one hand, we're promoting them, but on the other hand, you know, with a dramatic decline in supply and just how difficult it's been, I'm worried we're going to have a pretty sizable gap in the next couple of years. And yeah, I've been keeping an eye on the federal stuff too. But you know, how do we get to that transition period? So thank you.
Representative Pulsifer from Utah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing and for being here today. My question, you mentioned that you are including parents in your, I don't know, somehow in the program, and I would just love to know how that looks and what that means.
Sure. I just got a slide from them today, so I made sure I would speak about it correctly. This is just new to us because I truly feel like, can you see my slide here? What is parent cabinet?
Yes, no? The presentation mode, but we can see it.
Okay. Every time I hit presentation, it goes back to the beginning. So I'm going to keep it like this and hope you can see it well enough. We've spent about 1.5 years. The structure is we literally went all over the state to parent leadership groups and recruited about 8 leaders who said they'd spend a year helping us design this. So it was designed by parents. And then we have 6 regions. So we have to make sure there are at least 2 parents from each region. And the idea is there'll be some more leadership training, and then we'll have quarterly meetings. But just like we bring items to our SAC, which is the State Advisory Council, which you all have one as part of Head Start and probably part of your CCDF plan. We'll bring items to the parent cabinet to get their feedback. And this is really driven by this idea that early childhood educators have had a strong advocacy voice in the state for 20 years. They're very organized, and the providers are very good at coming to the legislature and getting, what they need. But what they need isn't always what families need. So families now need something very different than 25 years ago, yet we have a childcare infrastructure that is centers open 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. And now parents are working all different hours, some days from home, some work 3 days a week, some work evenings and weekends. It's a service economy, and childcare hasn't shifted with it. And I think in large part because we haven't given parents enough voice in saying, what do we need? So the idea is it doesn't take that much money. We used our preschool development grant funds. We have one position for a parent, for an organizer who will work with the parents and make sure we're ready for the meetings. And then they will also interact. One member will be on the SAC, on the parent cabinet. They'll have a legislative parent that is going to follow the legislature and bring information that way. So their idea, you can see the 4 goals: to improve the legislation, to make sure we have partnerships with families, to make sure all kinds of families are heard, and mostly to me, to elevate the voices of families. And I'll let you know how it goes. This is something that's been a dream of mine. It's taken 2 years to get to this point. But I was sort of tired of just always hearing from one part of the equation. We know, you have businesses and work that need a workforce, you have families that need childcare, and you have providers who need to make a living. And I don't think we hear, it's not an equitable conversation.
Thank you. I love the idea. I'd love to hear how it goes.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that's really great. I feel like you're touching on a lot of things we have covered. It's a really nice way to sort of tie up this summer. We talked about parent engagement in July as well. Workforce support, certainly, governance. So really appreciate your perspective on all these things, Commissioner Bai. I wanted to ask, yesterday we spent all day talking about financing, and I was curious to know what the conversation is in Connecticut about all these changes you've made with ARPA funds. Obviously, the stabilization grants to the workforce is one thing, but I know you've also expanded eligibility to childcare subsidies. You're covering co-payments through at least the end of the year, I believe.
Yep.
What are y'all thinking about making these changes long-term once we can't rely on federal?
Yeah, I saw that in the prep question, and I think the biggest change we've made there are 2 long-term ones I'd like to see stay. One is paying for quality, paying the full cost of care for quality. And 2 is a universal home visiting program, which I haven't talked to y'all about. But one of the things, when I met with the governor, I had this really lucky thing. The vice president decided to visit the state. And so the governor immediately wanted big plans to announce right away. And in Connecticut, everything doesn't have to go through the legislature. Most of these early childhood funds, he could just decide. And so he wanted to decide some things very quickly to announce a comprehensive agenda in front of the vice president. So we brought him a number of proposals, and the one that he really liked was that we would increase the subsidy for accredited programs. We do not have a QRIS in Connecticut, and I wear that as a badge of honor because they have all turned into, not all, many of them have turned into really complicated, costly systems that are spending a lot of time measuring classroom quality, which might not be telling us what we need to know about system quality. And so in Connecticut, we're developing a system to just move people toward accreditation with one in the middle step. And so since we knew we were developing that system, I thought if I could get the governor to commit to paying more for accredited sites now, that would help move this whole system along. And so he agreed to invest $26 million over 2 years to increase the rates for accredited programs. And I can show you what that looks like on a chart. Can you all see my screen now or no?
Nope.
Okay, I got to do better. I'll do better. Hold on. Give me a minute. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. This is what happened in one day in programs. The average monthly payment for a subsidy child. So basically, we're just paying much more. And the governor said, and we'll keep paying more. So he's using 26 million in ARPA funds for 2 years to fund this. And then it's just going to be part of our subsidy payment system. So this is to fund a program that looks like this. So the idea is, this is our licensing level. We're already doing this. So I don't need to have a special program to do this. This is NAEYC accreditation is step 3. And so that is not done by my state. That's done by an outside entity and it's validated. So I'm not paying for that. This is the thing that we're developing. A tier of licensing will be a level 2 license. So it'll just become part of our regulatory system that you're a 1, a 2, or a 3. And now because of this, there are real reasons to do it. You know, it's not just 10%, our prior increase was you got a 10% bonus if you were higher quality. And that just didn't add up to anything. So we use this as a chance to really jumpstart that. And in perpetuity, we will pay more for quality for families on subsidy. So that's the one thing I would say. I'm excited about a lot of things we've done, but I never thought we'd be there. I'd never thought we could get that kind of jump in rates in a day. You know?
Yeah, that's crazy. That's wonderful to see.
And it's been very stabilizing for centers that are accredited, because in a minute, and it's costing us about $300,000 a month to do this.
Excellent. Other questions, folks? I know we're coming close up on our time here, but I want to be sure we answer any of your questions.
How do we request the vice president to also visit our state so we can have the same equal opportunity?
Yeah, it was a really, I will tell you, it was such a moment in my life I thought I was going to, you know, when you go to these things, they say you're going to be on a panel. So you're ready to be one of 80 people to say, hi, I'm Beth, I do this. So Vanessa's a new commissioner and I'm a new commissioner. We walk into the room ready to just be on this big panel. And there were only 7 seats. It was the governor, the vice president, Miguel Cardona, Vanessa, and I, and then Senator Blumenthal and Murphy. And then she shushed the press out and really took 45 minutes with us, just asking us questions about what's going on with childcare, and was really interested. And I was just like this the whole time. I was so excited, just trying not to say something stupid, you know? So she is deeply interested in these issues and is worth contacting. And I will say, I think we did before, and I think we do now, have really good leadership at ACF. They're really listening to states. So if you have ideas, talk to your commissioners and know that they really do have a federal voice. Because I'm saying to the feds, why are all the states, for example, spending $5 million on their own data system? Tell us what you want, and then let us develop a data system that all of us could use. Let's give that money to families. There are a lot of things we could be doing to be more efficient. And I do think the feds are listening. So we're at a good time for change.
Commissioner Bao, you gave us so much to think about. I took a lot of notes. I loved the family focus, aligned curriculum, the business and network support for childcare providers. We got into the workforce. We talked about parent involvement, home visiting. So great. I just wonder if we might finish with, if you have one last sort of, knowing that you've been in all these seats, what's the one piece of practical advice you'd offer up to our fellows as they're about to go from fellows to now alumni?
Yeah. I always say talk is cheap. Like, people have been talking about early childhood education for 30 years. I'm so tired of it. I always say talk is cheap. It's time to stop talking about early childhood, and it's time to make those investments. You all face, like I was chair of the budget committee in Connecticut, you face a lot of items that need your attention. But if we truly want to make a great investment, we've got to start to win that battle at the budget table and really increase the funding to early childhood to save funds later on. So talk is cheap. It's time for action. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Great way to close it up. Thank you again, Commissioner.
Yeah,
Barbie.
thank you, everybody. Good luck with your sessions. Great to see you.
Appreciate it. I think, am I going to hand things over to Melissa or Allison?
Me, here we go. Can you see my slides? Let me,
Yes.
All right, well, I thought that was excellent. I hope you all enjoyed that. We're gonna keep rocking and rolling and going through our day, but first up is a trivia question, which I swear is not gonna be a stumper like yesterday's. So the question, which I can't, can you see it on your screen? Let me close this one. You cannot.
Can't see the question.
Now you
There's the
can.
question.
By
Yeah.
land size, what is the smallest state in the United States?
Rhode
Unmute.
Island.
Yes. Was that Red Pan? I can't see who that was.
That was me, Cedro Cano. I'm from Rhode Island, so I know.
I would hope we're thinking someone in the group, there you go, Rhode Island, would be able to get that one. So congratulations. Now moving right along. So what's going to happen now, I think in a few seconds, Jenny's going to drop a file into the chat. But for right now, I just want to tee up what we're going to do for a little while. We heard a lot of information throughout the whole summer. I think we heard some inspirational things this morning from Christy and from the commissioner. And so what we want to do is really try to give you all an opportunity to consider what your next steps for children and families in your state might be. And you might have been thinking about this already during our financing workshop, or this might be something else that you're thinking about now. And so we're going to take 5 minutes to independently sort of just jot down some thoughts in the Word document that'll be in the chat. And then we're going to come back together and divide out into a policy room. And you see the options on your slide of where they'll be. They're quite similar to what we had yesterday. You don't need to go to the same room if you don't want to. That's sort of at your discretion. But we'll have a guided conversation with 2 NCSL staff, one facilitating, one as a scribe. And during that time, one thing we hope is, you'll be able to nominate or volunteer someone to report out for your group, just brief report outs. And also really take that opportunity to hear and share what other legislative colleagues are thinking about. Folks on the line are your allies. These are your partners throughout the country. So bounce ideas or share legislative activity. You know, remember you're a resource for one another, just the same that NCSL is a resource to you. And then we'll report back out briefly, and then we'll get on our merry way. Questions about that? If not, I will, hopefully everyone is able to see the form in the chat. And if you just click on it, it should open up and take 5 minutes and just jot some notes down. And I should say there are no wrong or right answers, and we know people are at different parts in their journey. So just an opportunity to sort of reflect and think about where you are or what you might want to accomplish.
Allison, I'm not sure if you said this, but just for everyone's benefit too, this is yours to keep. So you don't have to turn it into us. So make use of it as you will.
Let's give ourselves just another quick minute. It looks like Jenny put this in the chat at about 4 minutes ago. So as we start to transition now, a few things. One, when we do come back beyond just report out, we do have a couple additional things going on this afternoon. I'm pretty sure that our invites had indicated we'll be here till about 2:30, maybe 2:20 Eastern time, but keep that in mind. So be sure to stick around. And Riley is going to put on the screen, maybe I'll stop sharing and then I can see all your faces. Riley is going to pop up on the screen the rooms. So select, again, whatever looks right to you and sort of aligns with what you were doing. There's also a catch-all at the end. So if something doesn't pair perfectly, there's miscellaneous. And I'll see you back here in about 15 minutes.
I'm not seeing choices. Is there some? Okay, thank you.
Just put them in the chat. If it's not popping up on your screen, let me know and I can assign you something.
I see it in the chat, but I can't choose. Can you just put me into 5?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
You put me in the workforce one, I can't choose this time either.
Yes.
Kindly put
Thank
me
you.
on expanding access, Riley. Thank you.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you coming back. I don't know how your conversations were. Mine was excellent. And we probably could have used 10-ish, 15, 30 more minutes. And maybe over a cup of coffee and, you know, a Danish. But either way, we're looking at our computer screen. So we just want to do a little bit of share out, sort of, was there a common theme in your room, or what was one point that really stood out? I know from my room, we got a volunteer. Does everyone have a volunteer? Okay, do volunteers just want to unmute and share a little bit what your policy bucket is and what you talked about a bit?
Sure, I'll jump in and go first.
Thank you.
So I was in your group, the pre-K breakout group, and the themes that came out of that were in a couple of places, expanding pre-K spots, making sure that kids who are currently underserved by the available spots, you can have the option of having that program. The point was made about being able to increase preparedness for kindergarten coming out of pre-K programs, so kind of closing that gap. Funding options for pre-K to be able to expand those seats, integrating needs for childcare along with early childhood education. And also another prominent theme was the facilities need. So the idea that public schools are out of room and finding innovative solutions for actually housing those programs.
Thank you. Any other brave souls that just want to share a couple themes that came up? Or
so I can share. I was in the equity room, and there were only two of us, but then one of the teams was the Senator for Kansas. She wanted to understand more of the role of the children's cabinet, just to make sure, because the structure of government there is very different. And we both talk about allocation of resources for early child care investments that could be sustainable for the future, right? But that in my stay, I basically say that we do have in the short term a bill that we had been working on that is called the Child Care is Essential Act. And what we want to do is make sure that we could meet with the stakeholders that sooner rather than later, we're going to have a full session just to see if we could have some of those ARPA funds to be allocated for the increase of home childcare providers to get more of the increase of rates and families to be able to have more of support, right? So that was a short term. And we talked about challenges that we see in both of our states. When it comes to equity, I do know my colleague said that her district is very geographically diverse and different, which she has very urban areas and in the county, but she also have very rural areas. And in the rural areas, there's not a single licensed preschool, no doctors, no dentists, or even optometrists. And then so she is looking to find partnerships to see how they could close that gap and then have more equity when it comes to that. And one thing that we discuss is that with the technology now, they are able to access some of those services. And so that was helpful. So we're looking both for sustainability and long-term funding, hopefully in the state budgets that we do have. So yeah.
It sounds like from that room and what I listened to also, these were pretty robust conversations in small groups, which is nice. I wonder if one more person would like to volunteer to share a bit, maybe just briefly, kind of a theme or one main thing that you all agreed on in your small groups. There's got to be another report out person in this. I see the delegate unmuted. Are you ready?
I'm happy to report. Yeah, there wasn't necessarily one sort of overall theme because we were the miscellaneous group, so it was a little bit of everything. But there was definitely a good conversation and some really good ideas. We had a couple of folks from Minnesota who wanted to also sort of focus on family childcare, and I think the data piece and making sure that we were, using the evidence-based and research-based approaches that we've got to really make sure that our programs are, doing well. And I think the idea of not necessarily consolidation, but better alignment and better, better coordination, like the commissioner was sharing, was something I think, frankly, that was really enticing to a lot of us, and also the unique nature of our communities, making sure that those are represented, whether that's the geography issues or the cost issues in certain areas where cost of living is really expensive. And I think we all sort of touched on the supply and making sure that we have adequate supply to meet the needs in our communities.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope that you all just found this sort of a useful exercise to think about what comes next. I'll just say a quick comment. NCSL is your organization. We are here to help you. It would be our pleasure. So at the bottom, you saw a few things that we can do with and for you. So feel free to call on us if you need legislative examples, introduction to an expert, perhaps one of the 30 some odd you heard from during this program. Let us know. Jenny, Melissa, and I would love to help. And if you want to share your worksheet with us, there is no need, but if you have like a specific ask on it and it's easier to share it, you can feel free, but no pressure there. And I am going to turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone, for all your conversation and for being here through us. And now we want to ask for you to let us help you. And really what we mean by that is filling out an evaluation. I already have the email queued up. So within a couple of minutes following the conclusion of today's meeting, you're going to get an email with a Survey Monkey link in there to just give us some feedback on the program. I've heard a lot of verbal feedback, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that. And would just really love for you to just take maybe 5 minutes. I think there were like 6 multiple choice questions and a couple of opportunities for you to leave some written feedback if you feel so inclined. I'm going to send that to you right after this. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, but the survey will be open through next Friday. All right, next slide. Okay, so then just what's coming up next? You can expect a certificate to come in the mail. You're going to have a really nice framed certificate coming your way, so watch out for that. For our top 5 point earners, you're going to be getting a prize from NCSL. We'll be in contact with you with that as well. If you would like to know your points total, we're going to be tallying them up after today's meeting, so just let us know. We're happy to report that to you. But if you are in the top 5, you'll be hearing from us again. And now, congratulations, you are officially early childhood alumni. So you made it. We all made it. And so we're going to be adding you to our distribution list with over 250 other alumni across the country that you'll be connected with. And then we'll also share updates through that list periodically. So look out for that. And Allison, it's back to you.
All right. Something that my colleagues and I are always doing, we're working on the next thing, opportunities for you all to deepen your knowledge and interact with one another. So we have 2 things coming up in September. The first is, later in September, we're going to have a panel discussion with some early childhood professionals, which I know is a topic that was of interest to many of you. And then in just about a week or 2, we're going to have something called our Mapping Opportunities launch. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Wade to just share a quick second about what you can expect with this new body of work.
Thank you, Allison. And congratulations, everybody, for completing this program. You are the 9th cohort of legislators and legislative staff to complete the program. However, you are the first to do it entirely online. And so I congratulate you and thank you for persevering with this new format. It is one example of how NCSL continues to innovate. It was a decade ago when some group of NCSL staff developed this fellows model, and it has since, it's now spread across the conference, and we're going to be launching 2 more fellows programs next year, one on youth homelessness and the other around prevention of child maltreatment. So you have more opportunities to engage in this model, and we certainly hope they will be in person next summer. The other thing that we're doing, and this is what I want to talk with you about today, is we're adding a how component to this fellows program. For the last decade, we've been focused mostly on the what, imparting knowledge from experts so that you have a better understanding of the issues and the opportunities available to you. We're now considering how to add a how component, and that is to how to advance bipartisan legislation in your legislature. And so on September 9th, we invite you to participate in something akin to a focus group where we will introduce you to this prototype model that we are developing about how to work across the aisle to advance early childhood legislation in your state. We would appreciate your participation in this feedback session so we can better understand how it would be used in the states and So watch your inbox for an invitation to another session on September 9th, where we look forward to hearing from you. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank the innovators who took this in-person program and transformed it into a really engaging, thoughtful online program. So please find your applause buttons on your computers and give a round of applause to Allison, Jenny, Melissa, and Riley for pulling this off. Thank you.
Wade, and thank you, everyone. It really has been fun to work with you all. My last two meetings to call out or things to think about in the future. Last year, we launched an alumni series event, and we will do it again. It will most likely be in the fall, probably about 3 sessions virtually. And I think what we're debating or looking into at this point is really doing something about reimagining early care and education amid or as we come out of the pandemic. And then the final thing is Summit. Who can forget the Legislative Summit? And then there's one more slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. So Legislative Summit, this November, we're going to be in Tampa, Florida, where it'll be sunny and nice. There'll be over 50 different content sessions going on, and one of which that I'll just call out, my good friend, colleague, Jenny is doing a childcare session called Reviving, Rebuilding, and Reinvesting in Childcare. So if you're in Tampa, you won't want to miss that session. And now it's Jenny. Oh, just some notes for you to consider.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not as smooth at getting through from sharing my screen as Commissioner Bai was. That was really impressive. And by the end of the series, I really should be, so I apologize. We just wanted to think back to how we started. You might recall one of our first questions was to name how your legislative session was in one word. And now that we are a little bit of distance from legislative session, for most of you anyways, and are at the end of our time together, we wanted to sort of reflect on your time, on your experience as a fellow. If you have a share out, if you have something you would like to, an aha moment or something that really surprised you, you really appreciated in this program, please feel free to unmute and share that. It's always great feedback for us. But I also am going to throw in one last Mentimeter. Allison's going to drop the link in the chat, and I'll share my screen once more. But do feel free. I think maybe Melissa had teed up Senator Alvarado. I don't know if you're still on, Senator, and you're able to sort of share out your thinkings and how this might influence your work in Kentucky as you move forward while I get this pulled up.
Sure. So, and again, I mentioned a little bit of that in our breakouts. I mean, I think part of some of the questions I think they had asked in terms of how, I kind of got some questions from you all ahead of time about things that we can do in Kentucky and how things are working there now. So, and I put down some responses, just kind of how our structure works really in the state. I mean, we've got a lot of systems right now that serve kids, families in Kentucky that work together. And one of the main functions really of a Kentucky Governor's Office of Early Childhood that's there to administer the Early Childhood Advisory Council, which is statutorily created. It's a multidisciplinary council established by our legislature. And they're there to promote school preparedness for kids. It supports professional development, recruitment, and retention of early childhood educators and caregivers. It enhances early childhood education and development programs and services. And it also kind of prioritizes programs and expenditures of funds, which sounds great. We've been hearing all those topics being covered about how important a lot of those things are. And so there is some collaboration that's been created really by the Governor's Office of Early Childhood and the Early Childhood Advisory Council. They work really well together. They work to promote the vision that we have in Kentucky for the system and advocates for a lot of these improved quality of early childhood education and services. And they do this by working really across cabinets to strengthen a lot of these existing systems. We've got several systems that are impacted. Part of that's the Department of Education. We have the Head Start Association, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, and also the Division of Child Care. And then we have the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority. So all those are established. They're all great. In Kentucky, we've got the House and the Senate are both controlled by a lot of Republicans. We're not real big fans of big government. We like to have more condensed government. And but we have a lot of these departments. The hard part of it is that, the question was, how can we improve on some of these things? And although, a lot of these have been pretty effective at bringing a lot of these agencies and advocates and stakeholders and a lot of these legislative champions together, really the day-to-day administration of these early programs are still pretty fragmented to a large extent. And so we have a lot of different departments, a lot of governmental things, a lot of great titles, and there's been some attempts at collaboration, but it makes it hard. So, and I put out an example that I thought of was the Department of Education is a completely different cabinet, really, from our Department of Community-Based Services, Department for Public Health, and these are all under our Cabinet for Health and Family Services, which is what I'm the chairman of, and we work a lot in terms of that stuff. But a lot of these departments ultimately are led by, different cabinet secretaries, different commissioners. And the one thing that we know, and the pandemic probably has highlighted that much more, is that effective early childhood initiatives got to take more of a holistic approach, really, for health, education, family preservation. And so while our Department of Public Health works on things like our WIC and our HANDS programs, really it's got to be more integrated into our childhood initiatives. And again, we've heard a lot of commentary about that, where people are starting to shift this early childhood into maybe some of the younger grades. And if you're close in proximity where your cabinets can go downstairs and talk to the public health folks, in Kentucky, we've got all those things kind of fragmented and separated. And so our Department for Public Health administers our WIC and HANDS program, like I mentioned earlier. Our CHIP program is administered by the Department for Medicaid Services. That should be probably more integrated into our childhood initiatives. And again, we don't want to take anything away from a lot of the efforts to prepare our kids for kindergarten and school, but we got to make an effort really to probably drive more things like improved healthcare outcomes, healthcare coverage, nutrition, nurturing programs that provide a lot of resources and support for our overall family unit. And if our parents and families aren't well, physically and from a health perspective, then our kids aren't going to do well either. And again, COVID and a lot of the variants that we're seeing in our country right now are digging us further into a pandemic rather than moving us out of it. So a lot of our families, children in our childcare centers, preschools, schools are all struggling to meet the achievement standards we've expected. And it could take, months, years, really to know the full extent of what this pandemic's going to do. But that's kind of where my thoughts went on a lot of these things, is trying to blend a lot of that together. So it's going to be improved collaboration. Do we want to create more cabinets and more departments within our government? I'm probably not going to get a lot of support for that in Kentucky, but those are some of the big things that we've probably going to focus on. And a lot of it's just going to come down to funding ultimately, really, for a lot of our systems, is trying to find adequate funding from colleagues and trying to put those things together. So my focus is if we can get funding, trying to collaborate a lot of these organizations to talk with each other from a healthcare angle, from an education angle, and blend those together. And those are some of the things I'm going to take out from this. And you got Representative Tipton, who's a colleague in the House and is part of this now. So I guess we're now officially alumni representative, but we'll be working on trying to advance a lot of early childhood literacy and finding unique funding mechanisms for a lot of our pre-K programs, which we've given a lot of authority to our local school boards, and it's kind of decentralized to some degree, but maybe providing at least some structure and funding mechanism to expand kids to enroll in a lot of these programs. So those are some of the things I take away, some of the things we'll be working on moving forward.
Thank you for sharing all that, Senator Alvarado. You have a long to-do list, but you captured so much of what we covered this summer, and I hope that we've given you some ideas and some tools and some places to look for more information. These words on here are making us feel great. This is it's always such a big lift, I know, between all of us here at NCSL. And so it's great to know that you found this program helpful. Please know, of course, that if you have questions beyond this, we're here for you. Allison mentioned the alumni program that will be coming up. Those are exclusive opportunities to really go even deeper into these issues. So you've kind of got the 101, but with the alumni series later this year, you can go a little bit deeper. So look out for that. And thank you for your attention and your engagement. Allison, Melissa, any last things you want to add?
No, go enjoy the rest of your summer.
Hopefully we'll see you in the fall for alumni.
Yep. I think we'll stay on for a few minutes if anyone wants to chit chat or has any burning questions. The three of us are going to stay on, so no pressure, but if you want to chit chat, stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great work, everyone.
Thank you.
I have a question. If we wanted to connect with the speaker, especially Commissioner Bai, Connecticut, Rhode Island, so close, can we do directly to her, or do we have to go through your office?
I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. I think that since Jenny's been working with her, maybe us doing an introduction might speed up the potential of a response. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, we could certainly do that. Help connect you.
Okay. She's got a great concept there with the accreditation, which we've been working on for a long time in Rhode Island, so she might be able to solidify it for me. So it was great to hear that piece. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a note of it. We'll certainly be happy to connect you. Thank you so much, Okay, Smith.
Appreciate your time. Great sessions. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, I'm gonna leave because it doesn't look like there are any more members and this feels.
Just all staff, you put your hands in the middle and say, go team.
Big wave, huh? Excellent. Oh my God. I'm on cloud nine.
And
Thank
when
you, everyone.
those people who put it together, I would just say I was one of those people putting it together a decade ago.
Uh-huh.
The comment made.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone.